Hello and welcome to Control-Delete Tutorials. My name is Jason, and this series of videos is going to be about C# programming basics. So this is for people who are new to C# programming with regards to using Unity. And it's just going to go over some very basic things. The video should be pretty quick, and I'll keep updating the series with new different little things that you might want to check out. So we're going to start off very basic. We're going to start off what it looks like when we now download Unity. I'm using Unity 2019. By the time you watch this video, of course, they may have updated to a new version, but everything should be relatively in order. We're using Unity Hub, which is a kind of a new setup that they're doing when this video is created. So you want to make sure when you get Unity Hub that you also get a, whatever your personal license is, and you also download Unity itself so that the Hub can open it. So we're going to start off with creating a new project. So the new project, we do that by clicking New, and you'll select your version of Unity. And then I'm going to just start with a 3D project, and we'll just call this Basics 101, something like that. And you'll pick your file destination where you're going to create your project. And then we'll go ahead and click Create. Unity is going to restart and create our new project. Should just take a moment. Now I do want to say while this loads, and I'll kind of speed through this a little bit for the edit, but you also want to get some sort of scripting IDE. I'll be using Visual Studio, and we'll see if Visual Studio is already set up as the IDE that we're going to use for programming in Unity once it loads up. So this is my first time opening it, so this is a fresh install. So like I said, if you're brand new, this is exactly what you're going to see. So I'm going to speed up the video, and when I come back, Unity should be opened. Alright, so Unity is opened. Yours may look different depending on whether you have the dark mode or the light mode. I'm going to use the light mode for recordings. So we start off. I'm not going to go over user interface in this video. I can cover that in another video. I want to focus this video mostly on programming. Now there's a couple of things that I do want to cover real quick. One, creating a new script. So when we create a new script, typically we want to be organized. So I'm going to create a folder that I'll call scripts. I'll hit enter there. To create a new script, we can right click, create C# script. It's really important that when you do this, you name the script now. I'll show you why. Let's say we didn't name it and we clicked away from it. Down here we can see this little spinning wheel. That little spinning wheel lets us know that the code is compiling. And we'll see here that if we drag this to the left so we can see our names of things, new behavior script. And you'll see here, public class, new behavior script. Those names are the same, and they have to be the same. We don't want to have any spaces. I typically am going to default to using a Pascal naming convention, Pascal case, which is a uppercase for each word that we're using. But even if I go in here and I rename this, let's say I call this first script, something like that. Not a great name for a script, but for what we're doing. So we'll see here that the name of the script and the class name do not match. Okay, so that's not good. So what we want to do, we'll just delete that. What we want to do is name it when we create it. Now we could go into the script, edit it, and change the class name. That's fine, but this saves us a step. So I'll go ahead and just name this first class, and it'll compile. And after it loads, we'll see that it says public class first class. So we're going to go ahead and double click on this. Now, I know mine is set up so that it's going to go through Visual Studio. If you have Visual Studio downloaded, it should come up in a list so that you can choose that as your programming IDE, which is going to be your script editor. And we'll go ahead and open it. Now I'm going to hold Control and scroll in here just so we can make this nice and big for you to look at. So if you're brand new to C# programming, there's a lot of stuff kind of going on here. We have these 3 using sections. Now these using sections we'll cover in another video on what they exactly are. The good news is you currently don't have to worry about those. Next, we have our class. So it is public. Public means that we are allowed to give access to this class from another script in Unity. If we set it to private, it'll be protected. To do that, we would do private. But we want this to be public. We want to have access from one script to the next. So that would be public. So this is our modifier. Then we have our class. So that's our how we're going to have this public class. That's how it's defined. We have the name or the identifier of our class. And it derives from monobehaviour, which is what Unity uses. And we can see different monobehaviour methods here. So we'll talk about these next. Now there's more than 2 methods that we can use. There's many methods. We can create our own methods. There are some that belong to monobehaviour. One's like start and one's like update. These belong to monobehaviour. So we also have some other ones. So if I'm to hit enter here a couple times, we could also have void awake. Okay, and void awake is a method that is called before start. And then after we have start, we have a couple other ones. Now, I don't want to get too much into what all these are and what they are, how they, what different ones we can go to. There's a ton of them. So right now we're going to have void awake, void start, and void update. So void awake is really good for initializing different things. So what does that mean? Well, let's say we have different variables that we're using in our game. So some variables that we might typically use. So I'm going to hit enter a couple times here. And one thing we'll know is white space, what we call white space, is the space between different things. So there's a space here before we get down here. Doesn't really matter. It's more of a visual aesthetic. So let's say I'm going to create 4 basic variables that we might use. And I'm going to write them in a way that Unity will be able to use them in the inspector. So 4 typical variables that we might use. We're going to use the public modifier so that it shows up in Unity's inspector, and so it's available to other scripts. So the first one we're going to use is the type int. This is for whole numbers, essentially. Numbers without decimals, I mean. So public int, we have to give it a name. The name is the identifier. So first we have the modifier public, we have the data type, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to write right above here how we structure these. So we have the modifier, and I'm going to make this a comment. So anytime we see 2 lines like this, this is a comment. That means that this code is ignored when executed. So first we have our modifier, and that can be optional. If we leave it out, it'll be private by default. Then we have our data type. Then we'll have our identifier. And we're typically going to use camel case for that naming convention. So that's going to be a lowercase for the first letter and then an uppercase for any additional words. And then we'll have the value. Now we don't have to set a default value, but typically you want to create a default value. And we always end any line statement, any statement of code that we have with a semicolon. So we have public int. So public is the modifier, int is the data type, the identifier is the name that we give this variable so we can call it multiple times. So one I like to use is maybe age, like the age of a person. And at the time of recording, I'm currently 36. So I'll say public int age equals 36. Now, this would be kind of silly to do, but I could leave a default here, and I could initialize in awake. Now, typically, we're not going to initialize this type of variable. We'll initialize different classes and things like that we might use for storing our transform components or rigid bodies, animators, things like that. Those are things that we would typically initialize here in awake, but that's a little more advanced than where we need to go. So you'll see if I don't set a default here, I'll show you what it does in Unity. So to save, we're going to do File, Save. I always do Save All. You can do Save. I'm in a habit of doing Control-Shift-S. So that way if I have multiple tabs open here, I make sure I save everything. Now we'll minimize. We'll go back to Unity. Now we won't actually see this take effect until we apply it to something. So I'm going to just create an empty game object and apply my scripts there just so we can look at them. So to do that, we can just go up to Game Object, Create Empty. Okay, I can rename this object to Script Tester. You know, something generic like that. Name doesn't really matter here. Okay, I can apply the script in a bunch of different ways. I can either add component, and I can start typing in the name, and we'll see it there. I can remove the component by clicking on this gear and saying remove component. I can add the component back, or the script, by dragging it underneath where it says add component, and that will put it in. I can drag it directly up to the object. I can also right click and remove on the name. And finally, I can go up to component, scripts, first class. Okay. Now we see that we have our int variable right here. And we can see the int variable, if we click and drag in the center area here, we can change the value. And this is always going to be a number without decimals, so an integral number. And you can also see that it had defaulted to 0 without me putting in a default number here. Now, if I type in equals 36, you're going to see something else that happens. So I'll do Control-Shift-S to save again. I'll come back to Unity. We'll see the code compile down here. It updates. And notice that it doesn't change. Because I've already had a number set here, it's going to use this as an override for this number. So if I click on the gear and say reset, it'll reset to that default, so whatever I choose. So int variables are really good for just simple numbers that don't have decimals, I guess is the best way to say it. Now let's say we do need decimals. We have a couple of options. Typically we're going to go with the float here. So the float variable, again, we'll make it public. We'll type in float. And typically I use floats for things like timers because we need precision, we need decimals. So public float timer, and we'll set it to equal something like 300. Now, we can't just write 300.0. Anytime we're dealing with float variable, we need to have an F at the end. If we don't have that F, we're going to get an error that's going to tell us that we used a double type for a float. Double type is another type of variable. So if I do public double, I don't know, thing. We're going to not use this. Whoops. No. Okay. So in this case, we don't have to have the F there with type double. But the double data type uses up twice as much data. It does have an infinite range, though. Now, the float, it has a huge range. It's something like, I think it's 2 times 10 to the 34th power or something. I don't know. It's huge. I don't know it off the top of my head. But anyway, we're going to use floats. So that'll be the other primitive data type that we use. Okay, and if I save and I go back to Unity, we'll see here after the code compiles, it says timer 300. Now notice in Unity it's not going to put the F there. It also currently doesn't show the decimal. But if I click and drag, you'll see that the decimal will show up. All right. We'll go back into Visual Studio and we'll do another data type that's very basic, bool. So a bool or a boolean is used for true and false. True and false. So I like to name these in a way that sort of asks a question. So things like, is alive. So is my player alive? Is my player not alive? Or is locked. Maybe I'm using a door. Is the door locked? Is the door not locked? Okay. And I'm not going to set a default for this one either, just so you can see what it defaults to. So I'll do Control-Shift-S to save. I'll come back. And you're going to see how the naming convention actually works here. So notice it defaults to false. That means that it's unchecked. If I check it, it's true. If I uncheck it, it's false. Also notice that as I use a lowercase and an uppercase, Unity splits this into two different words. So if something is checked, I can run an if statement code that will do something if it is checked and if it's not checked. So here I can also either do true or false. So those are my two options for my values for booleans. And then finally, we're going to do the non-primitive type string. So strings can hold characters, symbols, any sort of textual data, anything we can press on the keyboard in between quotes. So let's say I want to do something like first name. My first name is Jason, but I have to put it in between quotes. So as I type a quote, it'll give me the other connecting one there. So Jason, and semicolon. Okay, I'm going to continue this on. So I'll do public string last name. And that is alt. Hence the Control-Alt-Delete tutorials. All right, so first name and last name, and I'm going to make one more just so we can show how we can put a couple things together. So public string. Actually, you know what? This would be a good time for me to show the difference between member variables. So these are member variables, which means that every method that I have here can access them. We also have local variables. I'm actually going to get rid of void awake just because we're not going to use it in this tutorial. Okay, and then start we'll end up using, and update we'll end up using. And I'll show how we can use these together. So start happens before update, and it happens one time, the first frame before update. And then update will be called once per frame. So if our game runs at 60 frames a second, update is called 60 frames per second. All right, so in start, I'm going to create a local variable. Now, this one will not be public because it's a local variable. And again, these are member variables up here. Any variable I create here is only accessible here, unless I am able to pass it through and call it from somewhere else. But we're not really talking about that right now. So let's say I create a string, and I call this full name. And I'm going to set it to equal to my first name plus, in quotes, I'll put a space. So I'm adding to our string, so I'm connecting Jason. There's no space between these, so I'm going to add a space here by adding plus on either side. and then I'll do the last name. So what I'm doing is I'm taking this value, which is going to go here. I'm adding to it a space between quotes, and I'm adding the last name alt on the back half here. But this variable is only available locally in Start. So if I was to go down here and I type in full name, okay, if I did something like that, I'm going to end up getting an error in Unity. Reason being is that full name does not currently exist in update. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that for now. So I want to talk about print messages, and this will be the last thing that we do in this tutorial. So we've covered the different methods that we have here, and this is a very basic covering of what methods are. And then we've covered some basic variable creation. So finally, we're just going to talk about printing out a message to the console. So here I'm going to use print, and I'm going to print out our information. So I'm going to print out a message that says, I am, I'll put a space there in between the quote, plus age, plus, and in quotes, years old, and I'm just going to kind of continue this down here. And I'll do another print, and here I'll say my name is space, and I'll add to that my full name. So full name is going to take these two variables, combine them together, and store it as full name. So I should get a message that says, I am 36 years old, my name is Jason Alt. And then I'm going to go down and update and create another message. And here, this message is just simply going to say, this message is happening in update. Control-Shift-S to save, and we'll come back to Unity. So now we should see some stuff update here. Should show my first and last name, but notice it doesn't show full name because, again, that is a local variable. Here's the console. So our print message will come out to the console. And when it does, you're going to see the update message appear multiple times. Now, a way that we can clean this up a little bit is clicking on collapse, which will take any messages, warnings, and errors that we get repeatedly and collapse them all together. So what I will see is when I hit play, I'll see my two messages pop up of my age, my name, and then the message I put in update, because update happens after start. So we'll hit play. And there we go. I am 36 years old. Oh, notice I don't have a space there. My name is Jason Alt. This message is happening in update. And notice how it keeps counting up here. If I go up to my stats, we'll see that currently I am running at 33 frames per second. So I'm getting roughly 33 messages per second here. I'm going to change how this is displayed though. So maybe I don't want to see all this extra information here. So if I right click on console, I can get rid of the timestamp. And if I go down to log entry, I can set it to one line. That way it's just showing me these messages. So if I want to change this right here, I accidentally opened up my script again. There, that'll put a space there also, so in my message. And if I rerun that, we'll see that that fixes. Always wait for the code to compile. There we go. So I am 36 years old. My name is Jason Alt. This message is happening in update. and happening multiple times. If I turn collapse off here, we'll see that we have this message 250 times. So it's always nice to have collapse on there. So that was the first in this series of the programming basics using C# programming in Unity. Just giving us some groundwork on where we can create some variables, where we can create member variables, how they're set up, the start and the update function and how they work. So hopefully you liked this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I will be posting more videos in the future. So thanks for watching.